It's a tremendous honor to be sitting with Rabbi Daniel Glatstein, noted Rav Maggid Shiur, and for the purposes of this conversation, a prominent lecturer and Rav who has accompanied many a Lalechet tour trip around the world to many fascinating cities, fascinating trips. And Rabbi Glatstein, we'd like to get an idea of what goes into a Lalechet tour, a trip, a vacation, what it's like, and we'll dig into different facets of what you've done over the past 2 years. But first of all, thank you for joining us.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. Always a pleasure to spend time with you, to speak to you.
Thank you. So let take us back to the genesis of your relationship with Lalecha when it started. What was your kind of mind frame when you went into this endeavor of going out to some exotic places, some historic places, and giving Yidden the opportunity to really take a trip down memory lane, but a memory that they don't have, the memory of our nation, take a trip down really historic lane, allowing them to kind of experience history firsthand.
Yeah, so look, traditionally, the the focus in Klal Yisrael is always about the Daled Koslei Beis HaMedrash, and obviously that's the most secure place physically and certainly spiritually. But there is something to be said about learning in another capacity as well. Look, you have in Pirkei Avos, Tzu'u uru'u eza derech yeshara sheyavar le'adam. Go out and see. What does go out and see mean? Simply, it means that certain things in life, in order to understand it properly, it needs experience. You need to see it with your own eyes. So, although, as Reb Chaim Volozhiner teaches, as soon as you take one step out of the Beis Medrash, you're in danger. And there's no question you always have to, whenever you travel, you always have to have your guard on high for many reasons. But there are many limudim that I think, especially in our time, are really very available and can have a very big impact on people. It's actually interesting. I met someone who has an organization in England who he started off doing trips for Balei Tshuva, using it to take them to the camps, taking them to places where Jews lived in Europe for thousands of years. And then he slowly started developing his program to take yeshiva bachrim and balabatim and from people to these places. He told me something very interesting. Again, not saying agree or disagree, but it's something to consider. And that is he finds that in our time, the single most powerful Jewish experience that many people partake of in our times are the trips. Now, again, obviously, the Limud HaTorah is the most enduring and the most powerful and the most necessary uh, type of Jewish experience. And for those who feel that they get everything from that, obviously, v'samachta b'chol ha'toiv, kol toiv sheba'olam kol b'Torah. Someone on that madrega and someone who's living and breathing kviyas itim and limud HaTorah, obviously, there's nothing more powerful than that. But even for such a person, if I may say, there's a certain element of limud haTorah that is available through the proper trips. And if you say what kind of precedent is there for such a thing, milanu gadol, then if I name a few Gedolei Yisrael who were noted great travelers, I would like to consider the most prominent great Jewish traveler, none other than Reb Chaim Yosef David Azulai, the Chida. The Chida was known as a great traveler. Just today, I've been the last couple of days, I'm working on a sefer on the Ben La'ashri. I happen to have it on my desk over here. Ben La'ashri is interesting. He was a Makubal. He was a Chavrusa, my great-grandfather in Sachachav. He gives an amazing haftacha that if you speak out his sefer, he'll bail you out of any trouble in this world and the next world. Ad kedei kach, I once said this over, and Rebbetzin Kushalevsky heard this, and she told her husband, "We got to learn this."
Is
And
that
at
right?
the bris, Among other things, the Rosh Hashiva was toila it on learning every single day the Ben La'ashri.
Wow.
In fact, he gave me a beautiful Haskama where he writes about the Yeshua that he had. Um, why do I mention this? So the Ben La'ashri. So I'm working on. I just spoke into a gadol, a big writer in Bnei Brak. His name is David Avram Mandelbaum. He
Yeah,
wrote,
sure.
right?
Do you know that I'm so familiar with him? You know what I have here right on my desk?
Yeah.
I have this book on Daf
Wow.
Yomi from Reb David
Unbelievable.
Avram. This happens to be the translated version, but we know Reb David Avram Mandelbaum authored a really like a pictorial history on Daf Yomi. He is the historian when it comes to Daf Yomi. So
What
I'm actually familiar with David Avram, the author of a prolific author.
prolific. And I'm very into Svarim. I was not even aware of how prolific he was to the point where somebody just showed me, Reb David Avram, he not only he wrote the biography on Reb Nachum Zemba, he wrote the biography on the Eretz Tzvi, the Kosher Glover, and somebody just showed me, he wrote a critical work on the Chidah's book of travels, Magel Toiv. I was astounded. Here
Oh,
he is.
wow.
He's the biggest expert in Gedolei Poilin, and he wrote on the Chidah. So I emailed him. I said, can I get the Sefer? He says, by the way, I wrote 18 Svarim on the Chidah.
Is that what he
Yeah,
said?
yeah.
Wow.
I just sent the Bacher to his house now because I need them. I'm very dovuk to the Chidah. Anyway, the
Wow.
Chidah wrote a book of his travels. I have a special edition. I'm not going too far. There's a beautiful edition on the Chidah's travels called,
Oh, wow.
maybe you've seen this, with
Yeah.
beautiful pictures of all the historical sites in Europe that the Chidah visited. And I have an English version, which is not so available now, the diaries of the Chida. Chida was a great traveler. He traveled from 1753 to 1757 and 1773 to 1777. He visited over 150 different cities throughout Europe, Holland, Amsterdam, Frankfurt, um, Tunisia. He traveled really the length and breadth of at least Western Europe, many communities in France and in Italy.
What
And
would you, if I could interrupt for a second, how would you encapsulate what the Chida felt the purpose of his extensive travels were that we could learn from?
okay, good. So the primary reason for his travels were to collect money for the yeshivas in Eretz Yisrael. And he believed that was a very worthy endeavor. He writes in his Chuvas in Yosef Oimet Siman Yotes that there is no greater mitzvah than Limud Torah, and there's no greater mitzvah than living in Eretz Yisrael. Those are the two mitzvahs that are equal to all 613. So imagine if you could combine learning Torah in Eretz Yisrael. That's the ideal mitzvah. So he wanted every year to have a chelek in the ideal mitzvah of Limud Torah in Eretz Yisrael. So he went around as a shadar, a shlucha d'rachmana, shlucha d'rabanan, to collect money for the yeshivas to be Tomech Torah in Eretz Yisrael. That was the primary reason for his travels. But while he was at it, he used his travels to really expand and enhance his own scholarship. So, for example, in certain svarim of the Chida ala Torah, it will always begin with chidushim from the Tosfos Rid that he only saw in manuscript form from the various libraries that he traveled to. Also, we have many chidushim from the Meiri that we only know about because the Chida went to various libraries. You know who else followed in those footsteps in the last century? Rabbi Michal Ber Weissmandel also went to Cambridge and other universities, and he spent days and weeks and months because in all these places you have manuscripts, and the Chida really brought to life and he preserved. There's an expression that Baruch Shenasan Olam L'Shoimrim, that Hashem gives the world to guardians. The Chida was the guardian of Torah of the Rishonim that we wouldn't have if not for his extensive travels.
Hmm.
Chida was amazing scholar. When he arrived in Italy, he was in a lazaretto. He was put in quarantine, and without any svarim on him, He wrote one of the most important works ever written, Shem HaGedolim, which is a listing of all the Gedolim that ever lived before him and all the Chachamim that ever lived before him. He wrote it in alphabetical order without any, forget computer, without any
Yeah.
books in front of him. So there's a scholar of the last century. He's considered the father of modern day bibliography. His name is Morris Steinschneider. And he marveled that the Chida hundreds of years ago was able
Wrote such a sefer.
to write such a sefer. So it's interesting, if I could, the Sifrei Chasidus, Rabbi Elimelech of Lezhensk said that when the Chida came to the world, he counteracted the Tuma of Sfarim Chitzainim.
Hmm.
What's the pshat? I think part of the meaning is that the Chida was able to bring academia into Kedusha. You see, until Chida, the world of academics was like a danger, was like a trap. You could fall into it and you could fall prey to Chachma Chitzainis, to secular now. But Chida was able to show that history and bibliography and all aspects of knowledge could really be brought into Kedusha. So in so to speak, in the context of to extrapolate from what Rabbi Elimelech of Lezhensk says, maybe we could say the Chida also brought travel into Kedusha. Like he was like
Hmm.
Mavatel, the Tuma, the danger of travel. If you
Hmm.
do it in the right way, why do I say that? The Chida went to the Tower of London. The Chida visited tourists.
You're saying that he didn't just visit Kivrei Tzadikim
No,
and Mekamis Hakadoshim. He went to see Hashem's world.
he went to. There's no question. He writes about it,
Hmm.
and 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 I think the way he was able to bring it into Kedusha is he gave us a lens of how to view it. So, for example, when the Chida went to the Tower of London, he saw all the jewels of the king and the queen, and he said, on the one hand, he felt a great sense of mourning for the power and prestige of the Ummah Ha'olam who've persecuted us, but on the other hand, it filled him with great joy. Why? Im la'oivre ritzaynoi kach, la'oisei ritzaynoi alachas kama v'kama.
Hmm.
So that's a perspective of how to look at the world. It's a perspective when you see the success of the nations of the world, when you see the beauty of their culture. It's a way to look at it. It's a way to be misoinein over Churban Yerushalayim, and it's a way to anticipate the future. So the Chida gave us a way to see certain sites or to visit certain places and to take a very significant limud from it. And I
So
would like,
let's yeah,
yeah,
let's take that lesson to our conversation. Obviously, most people who are going on a Lalecha tour, they're going on a trip with Rabbi Glatstein to Europe, or wherever it may be. They're not going to collect money for yeshivas. They're
yeah,
doing it as an excursion. They're doing it as a vacation, but at the same time, they want it to be one of substance. They want it to be a learning experience. They want it to be a spiritually uplifting experience. I think that component of what you highlighted as far as the Chidas travels is really what's germane to this conversation, where our history is the richest of any culture in the world by far, and traveling around will give us an appreciation of where we come from. Like my great uncle Rabbi Wines, the Chayno Vracha, who was just nifter, would always say, in order to know where you're going, you have to know where you came from. And if I may, that's how
by the
I
way,
would
Rabbi
sum up.
Wine
Yeah,
is the father of these tours.
yeah,
He went on these tours before today. You look around, there are many options. But Rabbi Wine, he traveled to France and he has a series, Awesome Australia. He has a series on the Balkans, and he has a series on, you name it, on Russia, he was in Moscow on these tours.
yeah. So it really does give us an opportunity to connect to our past. Well, I want to address something. I wouldn't call it the elephant in the room, but whenever this conversation about travels comes up, there are some detractors, and I'm so curious to hear your opinion about it. Sometimes I'll hear from people, they'll say, I would love to go on such a trip. It does fascinate me, but I can't bring myself to go back to the blood-soaked grounds of Europe and to places where Klal Yisrael suffered such devastating tragedies,
Hmm.
sometimes tens of thousands, sometimes literally millions of Jews murdered on these sites. And yet, at the same time, there is so much to be learned and gleaned from it. What's a perspective that you could give us on that question of returning to countries where Klal Yisrael experienced some of the greatest tragedies, but also locations where Klal Yisrael also experienced some of the greatest scholarship and some of the greatest growth in its history.
Yeah, look, it's a valid perspective, and it's an understandable perspective. And our focus is not on the camps, and our focus is not on the place where they murdered us, although we do visit it. The focus is really not on the death and the persecution, it's on the life there. We were in Europe for 1,000 years. It's part of our DNA, you know.
Hmm.
It's part of our heritage. Judaism did not begin in Flatbush or Borough Park. This is where your grandparents are from for many, many, many generations. And it's very important to understand that. And if I may, just to expand on that, many people are into the history of their grandparents or great grandparents, but it's important to expand beyond that because, how long do you think you were in Poland for or in Germany for? Maybe you were there 4, 5, 6 generations. Where do you think they came from? They probably, if they were in Poland, they probably originally came from Germany, or if they were in Hungary, they probably originally came from Germany. Many of them came from Spain. So you Ashkenazim think of themselves as being Ashkenazim since Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam, but that's not always the case.
Hmm.
Many of them started off in Spain, from there to Morocco, to France, to Germany, to Poland. And I was once walking and I noticed a pretty big tree, and then I looked down on the floor, and the roots of the tree were had shot out so far and obviously so deep. And a tree could only grow as tall as its roots are deep. And I think the more you delve into, like you said, the more you understand where you came from, I think the potential for greater heights is expanded. It just opens up your mind. Look, I'll tell you just one little anecdote. Um, we recently went to Lithuania and Belarus. Okay, so I thought I knew a thing or two about the Chafetz Chaim. Like the Chafetz Chaim, that's not exotic history. Everybody knows the Chafetz Chaim. I learned in yeshiva Chafetz Chaim. I spent my whole life there. I give a shiur in Mishnah Brura and Sefer Chafetz Chaim, so I thought that's like something I had. And then I had to prepare for Vilna and Lithuania. I tell the truth, in 1 month preparing for the trip and being there, compared to what I know now, I knew nothing before. Really, nothing.
Hmm.
Going to these places, seeing the kever of the Chafetz Chaim. I'll tell you, um, on the Chafetz Chaim's kever is written all the svarim he wrote in order: Chafetz Chaim, Mishnah Brura, Shmiras Haloshen, Avos Chesed, Machne Yisrael, V'chayena V'chayena, and then it left out Sipisa Yeshua. It's not
Hmm.
there. All this, and I recently had the privilege to put out a sefer in English on the Tzvi Yeshua, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to go visit the Chafetz Chaim. And like that just shocked me. I'm working on sefer Tzvi Yeshua. It's not even on the kever. So,
Wow.
and then I realized that the Chafetz Chaim was not able to publish in his lifetime, and it was because of censorship. So when we were in Vilna, we found out about the censorship of the Maskilim and the power the Maskilim had in Vilna, and how the Maskilim tried to lure the Chafetz Chaim out of the yeshiva into the seminar, And then you realize, the Chafetz Chaim was not born with Sefer Chafetz Chaim in his hand as when he came out and his mother saw him for the first time. Chafetz Chaim had challenges in life. He was a Yasaim, and the Maskilim did everything they could to ensnare him. And the Chafetz Chaim had to overcome that in his youth. And, that built within him, obviously, the spiritual muscles to become the Chafetz Chaim. But all of this, obviously, you could get from reading, but Einoi Doime Shmiya Laria. It just a completely different understanding and outlook toward even, one of my favorite trips, if not my favorite, was when we went to France and say, who are you going to go to in France? You have Rashi, whether or not that's actually his kever, but we have a tradition, the Makkah where Rashi is buried, and then you have the Bali Atosis in Ramarapt.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody thinks, you learn yeshiva your whole life. You know who Rashi is. You know who the Bali Atosis are. My dear friends, if you don't go and see where the Bali Atosis are buried and learn about what Ramarapt was and what the Yeshiva Rabbeinu Tam looked like, it's Keilu, we don't know anything about Tosis. There's a series on the Bali Tosis called Bali Tosis. Every Masechta had a different editor. A different Baal Tosis edited each Masechta. And sometimes there'll be stiras between Tosis and one Masechta and another.
Mm-hmm.
And even Rabbi Chanan will say, it's a different Masechta, it's a different editor, it's not a stira. We're used to thinking, who's the greatest of all the Rishonim? The Rambam, right? The Rambam. All the Torah is on the Rambam. No, we don't. No, we don't hold that. The Marshal says Bnei Ashkenaz maintain that Rabbeinu Tam was gadol b'chachma u'v'minyan mikol Rishonim.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then you start to learn all different Rabbeinu Tams. You start to see a common, so to speak, outlook. You see the prowess of a Rabbeinu Tam, the amazing koyach hachachma Rabbeinu Tam. It just opens up your eyes. It's a different understanding.
It's so interesting to hear you talk about it so passionately. You've been to many of these historic yeshivas and kfarim and cities, metropolises that at one time were the centers of Torah learning, the centers of Yiddishkeit, and so on and so forth. And then tragically places where Klal Yisrael experienced great tzara. What would you say? I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but what would you say was perhaps the greatest revelation that you've taken now dozens of trips, each one with its own personality and its own flavor. What would you say the greatest revelation that you've had, something that either you didn't know or something that just experiencing it firsthand was transformative?
It's hard to pinpoint it. I feel that being in certain places, and I'm not a superstitious guy. I'm a no nonsense straight shooter. Literally, miracles have happened to me from being in certain places, and I say it unabashedly. For example, I'll give you just two, yeah?
Yeah.
First, I can tell you something that happened to someone on the trip. A good friend of mine, he came with me on a trip because he wanted to daven. He had a daughter who needed a zivug, and he came with me on the trip to Morocco, and we went to the Kfarim in Morocco, Rabbi Amram ben Duan and Rabbi Fal Ankawa, and then he came to France. And we down by the Rashi and the Bali Atosis. And shortly after these two trips, his daughter, who was also with us on the trips, found a wonderful husband, a French Moroccan. Okay?
By the way, you have to be careful where you visit.
Yeah, so he said it's a good thing she found him before we went to Alaska, because otherwise she would have to find a French Moroccan Eskimo.
Like an Alaskan. Very good.
Okay. Then, just the other day, I was speaking last night for the Chabura, in Borough Park, the Chabura. Yeah?
Yeah.
So there's a fellow there who's on our Moroccan trip, and he was telling me, he left, he stopped working and he went to learn in Eretz Yisrael for 9 months. I said, wow, that's amazing. Why, how did you decide to do that? So I'll tell you the truth. He feels that by davening by the Kvarim of the Merakim Tzadikim, it somehow gave him the spiritual energy that he said, he needs to stop working, and he went off to yeshiva. So that's, stories that happen to other people. One amazing thing, over the years, we've had the opportunity to speak to each other. You remember, I speak about my grandfather a lot, Rav Mordechai
Yeah, of
Leib
course.
Glatstein. So
Sure.
anyway, he grew up a Yasaim. He knew about his grandfather. His grandfather was the Rav in Linschitz. At the time, the Malbim lived in the city. He was best friends with the Malbim. And my grandfather is very attached to the Malbim. My grandfather didn't go a day of his life without talking and thinking about the Malbim. He wrote many different Perushim on the Malbim. Anyway, on one of our first Laleches trips, we we were in Ukraine. We ended up in Ukraine. And I miscalculated the dates. It was the night of my 40th birthday. And if I would have scheduled better, I probably would have scheduled to be home. I don't need to be in Ukraine for that date. Anyway, it was literally the last night of the trip. The last night of the trip, sometimes, we go a little bit later than usual. And almost at midnight, we got a message. There's one more kever we didn't go to. This is a kever that's very rare. They just discovered it, and would I want to go? I said, really? Who's kever? They said, you wouldn't believe it. This tzaddik never had a known kever since his patira over 100 years ago. They just found the kever of the Malbim. They
Really?
found the kever of the Malbim. And I was there. I really felt it was a birthday present that I had this chus to daven. They just found it. Why? When the Malbim passed away, they couldn't put a matzeva on his makam menucha because the reform said that they will desecrate his body. So um
Mm.
they just buried him like in no man's land. And Rabbi Sol Salanter came to the Kvura. He was Masbid the Malbim, and the Malbim was buried in a city. It was not a Jewish city, and it was like a terrible sorrow for the people that such a tzaddik was buried in a non-Jewish area. And the Rabbi Sol Salanter said, "Look, we don't know Darkei Hashem, just like Moshe Rabbeinu was buried Mol Beis Pa'ar, so that one day by Tchias Mesim he'll be able to be Mala all the Yidden that died at Beis Pa'ar. We don't know why the Malbim is here." And 100 years later, the Makam where the Malbim is buried became the biggest Jewish cemetery. Not only that, the biggest cemetery in the world history. The Malbim is buried in Babi Yar.
Is that
Yeah,
right?
he's buried in Babi Yar. And it's
Wow.
like Ke'en Nevuah, what Rabbi Sol Salanter said, that the Malbim is there. There are hundreds of thousands of Yidden buried right there.
Wow. And for you, this was just the personal connection because of your Zayda's relationship
Yeah,
with the Malbim. It's like out of a storybook.
yeah. It's there are no words. So
You talk about the Laleches tours, which I want to focus on for a minute. Many people may think to themselves, I, I could get on a plane, I could do a little research, I could go on a tour myself, I could try to figure it out. Maybe there's a Waze of some sort that will take me around. What do you think is unique about, besides now, I think you gave away the secret. I mean, anyone who needs a shidduch is gonna go on the next Laleches tour, and they're gonna decide based on which city you're gonna be visiting
yeah,
based on where they want their spouse to come from. But all jokes aside, and clearly there are definitely tremendous zechuyos and skulos that are associated with certain mekames hakadoshim and kivrei tzadikim. But how would you summarize why going with bechabura and going with a group with a leader and an arrangement like Laleches does, uncompromising on ruchnias, uncompromising on the Gashmias, the whole package, how that's different than, let's say, when Yechidim are just traveling and kind of figuring it out on their own.
look, aside from the obvious of the challenge of finding a minyan 3 times a day and finding kosher food in all these places, the going with a chabura is really definitely enhances one's appreciation of these places, especially the way we do it. We We on the bus ride, so we let the olam rest, and we'll give 10 minutes on a certain tzaddik. We'll let the olam rest, fall asleep on that, and then when we're at the kever, they've already been prepared, but we give another jolt when we're there, but not too long. And you walk away with the real kinyan of and a real connection to these great tzaddikim and these places. And if I may, I'll add on the side something that I noticed, which is very interesting, that for many people, the best part of the trip is the camaraderie on the bus and traveling around. You know, People forget that they forget about the human need to have, so to speak, like a camp experience. And
Hmm.
they did it when they were teenagers. And what I find is that socially, it is very therapeutic for people to have the camaraderie that you don't have when you're in shul. In shul, there's a certain you're there to daven, you're there for a simcha, and you have to make sure that you do everything the right way. People are watching, how did I make my simcha, and how do I bring my kids to shul? And when people are in a more relaxed environment and they're together, there's a certain camaraderie that I think people find very therapeutic.
Yeah, I think you're right. I've heard from people who've gone on these trips pointing out this exact point that they're uninhibited and they let their guard down much more. So you're getting just you're getting the pneumius of Yidden gathering together. No one's trying to impress anyone. People are there for one purpose, and that's to be uplifted, to be informed, to come home better people than when they left. And there's no question about it that
It's
these
a very
trips are.
enjoyable atmosphere. It's a very
Mhm.
non-judgmental atmosphere, but it's a very Torah atmosphere.
Right, right. Now, going back to your preparation, just give us a window into what's involved when you're contacted and they say, Rabbi Glatstein, we want to take a tour to this and this place. And
Yeah.
now you have to sit down. I could only try to imagine the extraordinary amount of research and note taking. And Baruch Hashem, you've been blessed with a tremendous encyclopedia of knowledge as it is. But every new place, I would imagine, requires extensive research and um, really a yeoman's amount of work involved in preparing to really be able to give that full experience.
Yeah, tremendous amount of preparation is needed. Sometimes the choice of destination is my idea. This is a place that I'm interested in going to. So I'll say, okay, we should go to this place. I'm going to be giving shiurim on it. I'm going to be giving a series on it, and I could really get people excited. And sometimes, they'll say this season it's the right time to go to this place, and some places, obviously, we know a little bit more about Rashi and the Balei HaTosfos than Moroccan Gedolim, but when we went to Morocco, that required so much preparation because that's an entire world of Gedolim. I wish I could show you. I don't want to go away from the screen here too long, but I have a book. I should really show it to you. You give me 1 second.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Go
Yeah, I
ahead.
want
Go
to show
ahead.
it to you. This is really a very interesting example of life and history lessons we learned from the trip. You see this book? It's one of the biggest books I own. Look how big it is.
Wow.
Right? This is a book called Matsevos Marrakesh. It's put together by the son of Rabbi Yaakov Hillel, Rabbi Yosef Hillel, and page after page, hundreds, if not thousands, of Gedolim buried in Marrakesh.
Wow.
And I was embarrassed to say, I don't know if I heard of even one of them.
Hmm.
It's such a big book, they had to write a second book as a handbook how to manage and
What
navigate the first book.
Wow.
That's how big it is.
Just in Marrakesh.
Just Marrakesh, not Morocco.
Right.
One of the cities in
One
Morocco.
city.
There's
Wow.
Rabat, and then there's Fez. And now, I read in here one of the most powerful things I ever saw. So how is it nobody knows any of these Chachamim in Marrakesh
Right.
or Morocco in general? And pretty much the only one that everyone heard about is Ar Chaim HaKadosh. Why? So he says, if not for this, even the Ar Chaim HaKadosh we would not have heard of. But the Ar Chaim HaKadosh decided to go to Eretz Yisrael. On his way, he stopped off in Livorno, and he found out about the printing press in Livorno and Venice, and he
Mm-hmm.
published his commentary.
Mm-hmm.
Ah, Sefer, he wrote a Sefer. So now everybody knows who he is. Now, Yafutzu Mayan of Chutza, and Shmoi Hoylech Miseifa Olam B'Yad Seifai. But many of these Gedolim, they didn't have the luxury of being able to utilize a printing press, and therefore their writings remained in manuscript form, and they weren't really known. So really it really highlighted the what it means for a Chacham Yisrael to be able to publish. And
Mm-hmm.
perhaps some didn't want to make use of the printing press. At the time, it was questionable whether the technology was the right way to go, whether we should take advantage, because after all, look how much uh, look how much tuma the printing press is producing. But now you see in retrospect what it means to be able to publish a sefer, what that meant to the
Mm-hmm.
Ar Chaim HaKadosh, and
Wow.
so that just, that's not just a little tidbit of information. That's, a whole vista of understanding Jewish history of Gedolim, and those type of things are priceless. I'm sure great scholars could sit in their Dalet Amos and they could learn this from books, but I have a feeling that a lot of this type of information, I feel, at least for myself, I gained through my travels. One more thing,
Mm-hmm.
one miraculous little story, and there are many of where this came from. I'm just going to tell you one, but there are a lot of similar stories. On one of our Laleches trips, we went to Lvov. I wanted to go to Lvov. Who's buried in Lvov? Technically nobody. Technically, there are no kavarim, but there are, because the Taz. Let's start like this: the Sma, which is a commentary on Choshen Mishpat and other Chalakim. The Sma, the Taz, Rabbeinu David, the Shoyal Umeshiv, the Yeshuas Yaakov are all buried in Lavav. The only thing is the cemetery was desecrated, and all there is, I was told, was a big plaque that they were buried in this spot, but we don't have the matzev anymore. And I really wanted to go there. The Taz, the Sma, fine. The only thing is that things were running late, and there was terrible traffic all in the Ukraine and especially in Lvov. And on the last day of the trip, basically, we weren't sure if we'd be able to stop off there or we would miss the flight. And I was davening and I was praying and I was pressuring the driver. We got to stop there. And he says, I don't know what you're talking about. There's no cemetery. And we couldn't communicate with him. And then the last second, he's like, "Oh, pose a sign, plaque in hospital." So we mean in hospital. He makes he makes a and he starts weaving through the traffic, and he takes us in back of the hospital next to like the air conditioner condensers. And sure enough, over there is this stone tablet with a plaque. It says, "Here was buried the Sma and the Taz
Wow.
and the Yeshuas Yaakov and the Shalom Eshev and Rav Mordechai Zev Atinga." Okay, I'm already in Gan Eden. I can't believe I was like, because first I was able to be there, and then Hashem answered my tefillah that we should be able to catch it before we get on the. And I have a family connection to the Shalom Eshev, and by the way, soon after that, I learned that after the Sma passed away, his wife was a very big tzaddikas. She's even quoted la halacha in the Drisha and the Prisha about the
Mm-hmm.
Zman of Halakas Ner Yom Tif, the wife of the Sma, the righteous wife of the Sma. When he passed, now she wanted to fast her whole life, but she wouldn't do it when he was alive. After he passed away, she was Yosheves Betainis Kol Yameha. She then walked to Yerushalayim from Lvov. She traveled to Jerusalem. Nobody made Aliyah
Mm-hmm.
from the Ukraine 400 years ago. She was considered such a righteous woman. Do you know that she's buried today near Zechariah Hanavi in Har Hazeisim?
Is that right?
Why? Yes. And I went to Har Hazeisim to go to the kever of the wife of the Sma. Fine.
Wow.
Now I come home. We went on this trip during the 3 weeks. It's now Shabbos Chazoin, literally a few days after the trip. It's Erev Shabbos Chazoin. I give a shiur every Friday. I'm scrounging around. What should I give a shiur on this Friday? It's Shabbos Chazoin. I'll give a shiur on why, Mibnei Ma'av da'aretz shaloi berchu b'Torah tchila. They didn't make berchus Torah. So I'm looking around. I looked in Yoreach L'Mayadim. Oh, he brings a geschmack, a shtickle. The kasha, the Magen Giborim, the Magen Giborim's kasha is that what do you mean they didn't say berchus Torah? So what? They said Avarabba. And we know b'di'evid, Avarabba covers berchus Torah. So Rabbi Yerucham gives different answers. The whole shiur was predicated on the kasha, the Magen Giborim. Everybody knows the Magen Giborim. But then I realized, I never gave a shiur on a Magen Giborim. Haloi Davarhu, that the whole shiur. So I want to say, you know what? I'm embarrassed. Who wrote the Magen Giborim? So I open it up. Reb Mordechai Ze'ev Atinga. He was the
Wow.
fifth name on the kever, and I didn't even pay attention.
Wow.
He's like, don't forget about me. I know you went to
Wow.
the Sma and the Taz and the Shus Yaakov and the Shal Meshiv, but the Magen Giborim, it didn't say Magen Giborim on the kever. It said Reb Mordechai Ze'ev Atinga.
Incredible. That's incredible.
I
Now,
have
those kvarim to this day are located behind the hospital in Lvov,
yes.
and there's no major cemetery.
No,
That's all there is, just a plaque.
nothing. Just a plaque.
It's absolutely mind-boggling.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll tell you one
Unbelievable.
more and then I'll let you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So we were once in Turkey. I don't necessarily recommend that people go there right now. I had to go there. I'm very makusha with Reb Chaim Falashi.
Okay.
Okay, we're walking around the cemetery. I don't know if people had been there in years and years and years. And we see one kever, it's overgrown with weeds. I literally remember we got down on our hands, our knees, ripped out the weeds, brushed off the kever. Rabbi Yosef Falaji, the son of Reb Chaim Falaji,
Mm.
who took over after him. Fine. I don't know anything about him. I always like to say a few words at the kever. So I said, we're here, we're in not Istanbul, we're in Izmir at the kever of the son of Chaim Falaji, and it's a zechus that we were able to clean up the kever, and that's all I said. I had a 30-second clip. Get home, it's Parshas Kisisa. I need a shiur. So I'm looking around. I see an interesting topic. Is there ayin hara when it comes to Talmud Torah barabim? Could it elicit ayin hara? So they send me. I was referred to a tshuva. I saw in a sefer a tshuva Reb Chaim Falaji. Oh, interesting. I would just buy Reb Chaim. I was by him. That's why I went. And after a few lines, Reb Chaim said, the truth is on this matter, the expert on this topic is my son Yosef.
Wow.
And he copies over a tshuva from his son in this. And my share that week was from an individual I had never even heard of.
Wow.
And we just cleared off his kever, and he says, "Okay, thank you very much. Here's a little gift."
Wow. You would call that not a providential coincidence, but true hashgacha. True hashgacha. Listening to you, I have no doubt that we have to have another conversation at some point because there's first of all, you're a wealth of information, and each tidbit that you share is more fascinating than the previous one. But for the sake of this conversation, I just want to wrap up that people who do go on a leleches trip, they have so many benefits, like you mentioned. It's the kosher food. It's the comfort of having a minyan for every tefillah. It's the chartered flight when you're on a flight with only Yidden, right? So you're not being exposed to things that maybe you don't want to be exposed to. It's really a unique opportunity, and if I understand it correctly, that when a person goes on such a trip and they connect with their past, really inevitably they're going to come back as stronger Yidden, more committed Yidden, Yidden who have an appreciation for our rich history, and ultimately that has to lead someone to want to be a better Oived Hashem, more connected, and just more uplifted.
Absolutely, I couldn't have said it better.
Reb Daniel, thank you for these 45 minutes that we got to schmooze about your trips. I hope we get to schmooze again, but continued Hatzlacha, and you don't need me to say it, but besides for how much we become enriched from these trips, I have no doubt that Klape Shmaya, the fact that we're, so to speak, uncovering and paying tribute to the Torah greats of the past, Rabbanim and Rebbitzins, who perhaps their memories would be lost if not for the fact that you're uncovering them, just as you just demonstrated in some of these stories. There's no doubt that that's a tremendous chus for you, for Laleches, for the people involved, for the people who participate, and we hope that that should indeed continue to be a schus, and we should be zeichel Laleches should take us, Be'ez Hashem, on the ultimate trip, b'meher v'yameinu, back to the Eretz HaKodesh.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much for your time. And the way you framed it, you really you're able to bring to life and gave me a new appreciation for what an opportunity is. Thank you.
Thank you so much.